Hi, I'm Tammy Lynn Guns, the Respect Doctor. And what I'd like to talk about with you right now is why some of us hold back in relationships. Why don't we actually fully show up for our relationships? So I have a job, and every 2 weeks I get a paycheck. So I hold up my end of the deal. I go to work, I do projects, there's criteria, there's standards, all that kind of stuff. So I go to work and I do these things, and then I expect a paycheck in 2 weeks. But let's say I decide to stop meeting the criteria, or I stop meeting the standards, or basically I just stop showing up for work. Should I expect a paycheck in 2 weeks if I don't show up? Well, of course not. If I'm not upholding my end of the deal, why would I expect that my company would uphold their end of the deal? But what about when we're in relationships? Some of us really don't fully show up in relationships. We like to sit on the sidelines. Oh, sure, we're there physically, and you can certainly see us, we're there mentally, but we hold back emotionally. We hold back our hearts. We don't fully show up for relationships. Let me give you an example. Let's say you owned an NFL football team. And what you wanted to do is you wanted to sell your team. Well, what you do is you tell your team, hey, I've got a buyer up in the stands, so can you guys go out there and play your best? So your team does. Your team goes out on the field, and they're running their hardest, and they're throwing their hardest, and they're tackling their hardest, and the buyer up in the stands is observing. But then let's say that the buyer decides not to purchase them. Now it's week 2. And there's a different buyer. Buyer number 2 is up in the stands. And you tell your team again, there's a buyer up in the stands. Can you please do your best? So they do. They're running really hard, and they're kicking the ball hard, and they're throwing their best. They're displaying the best of all their abilities. But buyer number 2 says, I'm not interested in this team either. So now it's week number 3, and there's buyer number 3 up in the stands. And you tell your team, can you again show me your best abilities because I got another buyer up in the stands? Well, at this point, they start to say, no, I'm tired of giving my best. Before I displayed my best, and neither of the other buyers bought the team, so I'm going to kind of hold back. But let's say buyer number 3 was actually the perfect buyer for this team, but decided not to buy the team because the team actually held back. They didn't throw their hardest, run their hardest, tackle their hardest. But you know what? We do that in relationships as well. We fully expect the other person to show up because how are we going to evaluate them? Say you have a new friendship or a new romantic relationship. You want to be able to fully evaluate that person, right? Are you going to be a good friend to me, or are you going to be a good romantic partner to me? So we want them to show up with their best game so we can see and fully evaluate them. But we decide to sit on the sidelines. We decide to not fully show up so that person can't fully evaluate us. Now, why do we do this? It's kind of like the NFL football team. They tried and they didn't get bought. They tried and they didn't get bought. So then they are somewhat wounded. And aren't we wounded in our childhoods? Or some of us are wounded just throughout life. And then we decide, well, I'm not going to show my best self anymore because look what happens. I don't get bought. We have our defense mechanisms and we hold back. We hold back and we're not willing to fully invest until we feel safe. But don't you see the irony in that? Don't you see if you don't show up with your best self, you won't display your best self, and then people won't really know who you are. So you really owe it to yourself every single day to show up as the authentic you and the best you. Remember always that you are worthy, you are lovable, and you deserve goodness in your life.